Hi, it's Ron at Dirt Bike Magazine. Welcome to the 19's Dual Sport Edition. This is where we're going to show you all of the new dual sport bikes offered for 2019, at least the ones that we consider dirt-oriented enough to be included in Dirt Bike Magazine. Now we're going to take a look at the Husky FE450. Now a lot of people might not remember this, but Husky started it all. Back in the early 2000s, the first dual sport bike that we considered a serious dirt bike, just street legal, was from Husky. In those days, all the Huskies were made in Italy. Now everything's changed. They of course come from Austria, which is the same factory that produces KTM motorcycles. But this bike is its own bike. For all the people who say that a Husky is just a white KTM, couldn't be further from the truth. In this case, there is no 450 version of this bike in the KTM line. This bike also has different brakes. This uses Maguras, whereas KTMs use Brembos. This has a different clutch master cylinder. It has different bodywork. It has a different airbox, a different subframe. Pretty much everything until you get to some of the motor components has a different part when it's a Husky versus a KTM. The FE450 is kind of the same chassis and the same motor configuration as the FE450 that Jason Anderson used to win the Supercross title in 2018. Now, having said that, of course, it doesn't run like Jason's bike. It's a very different state of tune. When the EPA approves a bike for DOT use, they have to pass very strict standards for emissions and for noise. KTM and Husqvarna engineers went through some pretty elaborate lengths to get that noise level down. In the airbox, between the airbox and the throttle body, there's a reed valve. It's straight out of Husky TC85. This kind of dampens the intake noise that is, as it turns out, is a big factor in the drive-by noise test. There's other interesting technology here and there, but the bottom line is it's legit. Husqvarna is scrutinized just as tightly as Honda, Yamaha, or any of the large Japanese OE manufacturers. They have to pass the same tests, and they're considered a major manufacturer. So when you ride the FE450, it's quiet. Passes emission tests that are just as tight as those facing anyone. In Husqvarna's line, there is no 450 trail bike anymore. There's only the FX450 competition bike, which is essentially a motocross bike with an 18-inch rear wheel. This bike has a 6-speed transmission, and it's in a very, very different state of tune than the FX competition bike. It's much smoother. The power comes on very, very gradually and doesn't really have the huge top-end kick that you might expect out of a competition bike, but that's all perfect. This bike is ideal for the trail. We really like it, particularly when it comes to throwing a bike around very, very quickly on small trails, manhandling it, taking it over rocks and places where a 450 motocross bike would just be an animal. The suspension on this bike has full linkage just like the motocross bike. That's very, very different, of course, from the KTM, which has PDS no-link rear suspension. As a result, the Husky weighs just a little bit more than you would expect out of a KTM counterpart if it made one. The closest thing that KTM makes is the 500, and that bike is about 3-4 pounds lighter than the Husqvarna. Still, that's not something you notice. Handling is this bike's strong point. Another thing that people really love about the Husqvarna in particular is the fact that you can take the bike and modify it into a closed course competition bike much more easily than you can a KTM. Most of that is because the airbox is very closely related to the FE450 motocross bikes. In the case of the KTM EXC line. That's not true because of the PDS rear suspension. Everything's a little bit different back there. We know we keep on mentioning the KTM in this review because it's hard to separate the two. One thing that we will stand by is the fact that this bike is its own bike. It does have its own personality, and it's one that pretty much any hardcore trail rider will come to appreciate. This definitely leans towards the dirt end of the spectrum, maybe not as much so as say a Beta, but much more dirty than a Honda CRF 450L. We're going to do a full shootout. You can look for that in the February issue of Dirt Bike Magazine, and on dirtbikemagazine.com you're going to see a lot more dual sport info in the next coming few weeks. Stay tuned.